Hi everyone, I'm Micah, and this is the beginning of a sci-fi story I've been developing for a while. It's a slow-burn mystery with emotional weight, grounded characters, and a touch of the surreal. The story follows Eric Dandasan, a high school student who begins experiencing strange blackouts and visions. As the episodes worsen, he discovers he's caught in something far bigger, something tied to time, memory, and a universe he may not fully belong to. If you're into character-driven, sci-fi gradual world-building twists that grow with each chapter, this might be up your alley. I'll be posting chapters regularly, and I'd love feedback, theories, and reader thoughts as the story unfolds. Thanks for reading. Here's Chapter 1, The Headache. Chapter 1, The Headache. The first bell echoed, down the long, sunlit hallways of Gallatin High School, mingling with the scrape of lockers and the chatter of students easing into another day. Eric Dandasan shuffled into the building, his backpack slung low over one shoulder, eyes half-lidded against the bright Montana morning. He passed clusters of kids swapping weekend stories, the scent of pine cleaner and cafeteria coffee hanging in the air. His own thoughts felt heavy, clouded by the dull throb behind his temples that had started the day before and stubbornly refused to fade. "Hey, Eric!" someone called. Jamie, from his history class, waved near the lockers. She had that easy, magnetic grin that made the crowded halls feel a little less chaotic. "Morning," Eric replied, forcing a nod as he fell into step beside her. "So," Jamie said as they turned the corner, "ready for Alden's quiz tomorrow?" Eric shrugged, rubbing the side of his head. "I don't even know if I'm going to make it through today without passing out." Jamie gave him a sideways glance. "Rough weekend?" "Not really. Just this headache that won't quit." "Skipped breakfast again?" "Maybe." He tried to keep his tone light, but even his voice felt tired. "Well," she said, nudging him with her elbow, "if you need to copy my notes later, just say the word." He gave a faint smile. "Thanks, I might." The clock above the main entrance chimed again. They reached the door to Mr. Alden's classroom, the low murmur of voices spilling out into the hall. Jamie shot him a look. "Just survive until lunch." Eric nodded, touching the worn leather strap of his grandfather's old watch, a small comfort in the swirl of movement and noise. "I'll try." They stepped inside. Scene 2, Algebra. The bell rang sharply, signaling the end of history class. "Mr. Alden's voice faded as students shuffled out, their footsteps echoing down the linoleum halls. Eric packed his notebook slowly, rubbing his temples where the dull ache had been creeping all morning. "See you later, Eric," Jamie called from the doorway, already laughing with a group of friends. "Later," he muttered, forcing a smile. Hallway buzzed with the usual midday energy. Lockers slamming, students laughing and weaving through crowds. Eric's vision wavered for a moment as a sharper pulse throbbed behind his eyes. He gripped the edge of his locker for balance, blinking hard to clear the fog. "Hey, you okay?" a voice asked. Eric looked up to see Jamie approaching again, concerned, knitting her brow. "Just a headache," he said, trying to sound casual. "It's been bugging me all day." Jamie didn't look convinced, but nodded. "You should take it easy. Maybe hit the nurse if it gets worse." Eric shrugged, closing his locker. "I'll be fine." They walked in silence for a few seconds, before Eric added, "Thanks, though." Jamie gave a light nudge with her shoulder. "Just don't pass out in algebra. That class is brutal enough without someone face-planting in the middle of it." Eric managed a quiet laugh. "No promises." The bell rang again, and they slipped into their seats just as Ms. Carter began handing out worksheets. Her sharp eyes moved across the room, daring anyone to be unprepared. Eric's pencil hovered over the worksheet, but the numbers swam in front of his eyes. Ms. Carter's voice droned on about factoring quadratic equations, but it barely registered. He pressed his fingers to his temples again, trying to ease the pressure. The headache had sharpened into a steady throb, and now a faint metallic taste crept into his mouth. The room felt warmer than usual. He glanced around. Students were busy, some tapping pencils, others whispering answers. The fluorescent lights above flickered once, briefly casting the room in a sickly hue. Jamie caught his eye and gave him a small, encouraging smile. Eric tried to return it, but felt a sudden wave of nausea. He shifted in his seat, careful not to draw attention. "Eric?" Ms. Carter's voice cut through the fog. "Are you feeling all right?" He blinked rapidly, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I'm fine," he whispered, though the words felt heavy. The throbbing behind his eyes pulsed faster, and he squeezed them shut for a moment, willing the pain away. Sharp, prickling sensation started at the back of his neck, crawling upward like tiny ants. He opened his eyes just as a small drop of blood escaped his left nostril. "Oh," he murmured, reaching up to dab it quickly with a tissue. Ms. Carter's brows knitted together with concern as she approached. "Eric, maybe you should see the nurse." "I'll be okay," he insisted, but his voice betrayed him, shaky and weak. Jamie stood, moving to his side. "Come on, let's get you out of here." Eric hesitated but nodded, feeling the room tilt slightly as he stood. The bell rang, signaling the end of class. As they walked down the hall, Eric fought the urge to sit down right then and there. Outside the classroom, the chatter of students faded into a low hum. He took a deep breath of the cool hallway air, the sharp sting in his nose, lingering. Jamie glanced at him, eyes wide. "You really should have told me sooner." Eric shook his head, trying to steady himself. "I didn't want to make a big deal out of it." She frowned. "Sometimes it's okay to slow down, Eric." He wanted to believe her. The lunch bell blared and the hallway filled like a busted dam. Eric kept to the edges, skirting groups of students laughing too loud and moving too fast. He wasn't hungry. The ache in his head had spread, dull pressure behind his eyes and a weird stiffness in his neck, like he was holding himself up wrong. Jamie had peeled off after algebra with a quick, "See you later," and he hadn't tried to follow. The EEI cafeteria was too loud anyway, too bright. Instead, he drifted outside to a low stone wall behind the school commons, where the breeze still carried some of the morning's chill. From here, he could see the ridge lines in the distance, snow clinging to their shaded crests. Below them, half-built neighborhoods sprawled over what used to be his grandfather's grazing fields. He used to ride out there on weekends with his dad before the land was sold off, 1 acre at a time. Eric pulled out his phone and stared at the black screen, forgetting why he'd taken it out in the first place. He blinked. The pressure in his temples was sharp now, as if something inside his skull was expanding just slightly, just enough to make him dizzy. A strange memory surfaced. Not a real one. At least it couldn't be. He saw himself standing at the edge of a burning building, the smell of smoke thick in the air, sirens wailing. His hands were shaking. Then it was gone. He blinked again and looked around. The courtyard was just as it had been. Noisy, teenagers moving in packs, football spiraling through the air. Nothing was on fire. His hands were fine. But for a moment, he wasn't sure. He sat still for the rest of lunch, the sounds around him muffled, his body heavy. Something was off. He didn't know what, but it was getting harder to ignore. Scene. The library. Eric sat at the table in the library, the fluorescent lights above humming faintly, mixing with the soft rustle of pages and the occasional click of a keyboard. The monitor in front of him glowed dimly with a half-read Wikipedia article. Annexation of Texas. The text blurred slightly as he stared at it, unfocused. He rubbed his temples with both hands. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, reaching for his backpack and fishing out a half-empty bottle of Advil. As he unscrewed the cap, something caught his eye. The portrait of George Washington hanging above the bookshelf. It looked wrong. The colors seemed too vivid, the eyes a little too watchful. Almost like the old man in the frame was studying him back. Eric blinked and looked away, brushing it off. He shook 2 pills into his hand and popped them into his mouth, swallowing dry. "Eric Dandasan!" A sharp voice cracked through the quiet. He turned to see Mrs. Halvers, the school librarian, approaching with a disapproving glare and a cardigan pulled tight over her shoulders. "What did you just put in your mouth?" Eric sat up straighter. "Just Advil, ma'am. I've got a headache." She stopped a few feet from his table, arms crossed. "You're aware of the school's medication policy. Hand them over." Eric hesitated, brow furrowed. "It's just..." And then it hit. The pain wasn't just behind his eyes anymore. It was inside them. A sudden pressure, sharp and electric, like something was trying to burst out from behind his forehead. He gasped, gripping the edge of the table. Everything around him, the shelves, the portrait, Mrs. Halver's, wavered, and then he heard it. Screaming. Not in the library, in his head. "Eric!" A woman's voice called out, desperate and terrified. Fire. Blinding and furious. Smoke curled. Around him, heat pressed against his face. The smell of burning plastic and scorched wood flooded his senses. Someone was calling his name from the flames. "Eric!" His hands were shaking and he couldn't move, couldn't speak. He blinked, and the fire was gone, so was the library. He was sitting at a different desk now. Cooler air. A flickering projector cast diagrams on the whiteboard, labeled organs and vascular systems. Laughter rippled around him, his heart hammered in his chest. "Eric," came another voice, annoyed now. "I asked you a question." He turned, confused, and saw Mrs. Carson standing beside his desk, arms folded. The classroom around him came into focus. Biology. 5th period. "What the hell? Mrs. Carson?" His voice was dry. May I be excused?" She frowned, studying his face. "You don't look well. Yes, go." Eric stood on legs that didn't feel like his. The bell hadn't rung. He'd missed time. 90 minutes at least. Eric stepped out into the hallway, the noise of the classroom fading behind him. The air felt colder here, and for a moment, he was just standing still, trying to catch his breath. He looked down at his hands, slightly trembling. The lingering heat of that impossible fire still burned somewhere inside his mind, even though the hallway was quiet, empty. He should feel relief. Instead, something tightened inside his chest. He didn't belong. Here, not really. He started walking, the dull headache now pulsing steadily. The school corridors stretched on, long and lifeless. Eric arrived at the nurse's office, a place he had never actually been before. The walls were pale and sterile, the scent of disinfectant hanging faintly in the air. "Can I help you?" the nurse asked, looking up from her clipboard. "Yeah, my head," Eric said, pressing a palm to his temple. "I've got a headache." "All right, lay down," she said, motioning to the small cot tucked into the corner of the room. Eric settled onto it, the paper sheet crinkling beneath him. The nurse moved beside him, gently wrapping a blood pressure cuff around his arm and checking his vitals, more out of protocol than concern. Everything read normal. She gave a small sigh and a polite smile, likely chalking it up to another student looking for a break from class. "Okay, get some rest," she said, jotting something down on her clipboard. "I'll inform your teachers. What's your name, hun?" "Eric, ma'am." "Eric Dandasan," he answered, his voice still groggy. The nurse jotted it down on her clipboard. "All right, Eric, just get some rest, dear," she said with a gentle smile. Eric lay back on the cot, the room spinning slightly as he settled in. The sterile scent of rubbing alcohol and faint hum of fluorescent lights faded into the background. Before long, his eyes fluttered closed. The sound of the final bell jolted him awake. Eric sat up slowly, disoriented. "How long was I asleep?" "Just a few hours, dear," the nurse replied, straightening the papers on her desk. "That was the final bell. Think you can make it home, or should I call your parents?" He rubbed his eyes and nodded. "I think I'll be okay." Gathering his things, Eric stepped out of the nurse's office and into the now quiet hallway. A faint ache still pulsed at his temples. He moved slowly to his locker, the echo of his footsteps oddly sharp in the emptiness. Opening it, he began, switching out books, grabbing his backpack and slipping it over one shoulder. A wave of nausea hit him out of nowhere, forcing him to pause, one hand gripping the locker door for balance. He closed his eyes and waited for it to pass. Maybe he should call his mom for a ride. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the screen, but after a moment he slid it back into his pocket. His father wouldn't approve. He'd say the walk would do him good. With a resigned breath, Eric shut the locker and turned toward the front doors, steeling himself for the 20-minute walk, home, each step feeling just a little heavier than the last. The 20-minute walk stretched into 40. My head felt like someone was stabbing it with a hot needle. My nose bled twice, and the lightheadedness forced me to stop and drop to my knees more than once. When I finally reached the house, the door was locked. I rifled through my pockets for my key. "Fuck," I muttered. The door swung open before I could knock. Eric Meager Dandasan. Language like that in my house? If your father heard you. My mother's voice caught as she took me in. "Sorry, Mama," I said, wincing. She stepped closer, eyes scanning me up and down. "What in God's name happened to you? You look like you've been through hell and come back." "I just have a headache," I mumbled. She wasn't buying it. "That's more than a headache, boy. Is that blood on your sleeve?" "Yeah." Had a nosebleed. As she reached to dab at the blood, I caught sight of my father, coming out from the back room. He was a large man, broad shoulders and a face weathered by years of hard work, but there was no softness in his eyes. We still bred cattle, but it wasn't the sprawling ranch my great-great-grandfather had built. Times had been hard since the 80s. Grandpa had to sell off the land just to keep us afloat. What was once a 2,000-acre spread was down to barely 300. Headache, huh? Dad's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Yes, sir," I said, avoiding his gaze. "Do you even know what a headache means, boy?" I stayed silent, knowing better than to answer. "It means weakness leaving the body. The herd's out back and your brother's already doctoring them. Get yourself cleaned up and head out." "Bruce!" Mom protested, her voice trembling. "He's in no condition." Dad's cold glare silenced her instantly. His word was law. It didn't matter if I was sick enough to collapse. My place was with the cattle. I changed as fast as I could, fighting the dizziness, and made it to the barn before I could collapse. Robbie was there, syringe in hand, scowling as he worked the cattle. "About damn time," he muttered. "What did you do? Stop and take a nap?" "Sorry," I mumbled. Robbie, Robert Xavier Dandasan II, was named after our grandfather, but he didn't live up to the legacy. Once a star basketball player with a future ahead, but the pandemic knocked the wind out of his sails. Now he was just an asshole with a syringe. "If you're done dragging your sorry ass, start bringing the cattle in." "I've got work to do," he barked. I pulled on my gloves and staggered toward the herd. Then the dizziness hit hard and everything went black. I awakened on the sofa inside the house. My younger sister, Lena, sat beside me, tears in her eyes. From the next room, I could hear my parents arguing. "God damn it, Bruce. I told you he was in no condition to do chores." "For Dad's sake, woman, you baby the damn boy. When I was his age, I got trampled and still did my—" "I don't want to hear that shit, Bruce," Mom snapped, cutting him off. "Every time he or Lena gets a sniffle, you're off to Bozeman Hospital. Mama." "Daddy, he's awake!" Lena called out, her voice shaky. My father was the first to enter. His stern expression had melted into something closer to disappointment. My mother followed right behind him, tears streaking her cheeks, her face etched with worry. "Are you okay, baby boy?" she asked softly. "He's fine, Lois," Dad began. "If he was fine, he wouldn't have face-planted into a pile of cow shit, Bruce," she barked, rounding on him. I looked at Lena. "Did I really face-plant into cow shit?" She nodded with a sheepish grin, trying not to laugh. "I'm taking him to the hospital," Mom said firmly. "Mom, I'm fine. I just need—" "Boy, get upstairs and get to your studies," Dad interrupted. "Shut it, Bruce," Mom snapped, her voice a whip crack in the room. She turned to me with a fire in her eyes. "Eric, get upstairs, take a bath and go to bed. Lena, go finish your schoolwork. Now my father was the man of the house, our provider, our hammer. But when Lois Annetta Meager Dandasan went into full mama bear mode, what she said wasn't a suggestion. It was law. The water was warm and relaxing, but it did nothing for the pounding in my skull. I let my eyes drift shut for just a moment. Flames. The house, burning in the distance. My eyes snapped open. The tension in my head had sharpened, crawling behind my eyes like something alive. Almost unbearable now. Maybe I should go to the hospital. I glanced down. The water had turned red. My nose. And that's when it hit. A white flash, my high school. Graduation. Failing out of university. A marriage, a divorce, a daughter, another marriage, and another divorce. A series of dead-end jobs, a fire, a grave. It didn't make sense. They felt like memories, real, heavy. And the pain from the influx. Eric! Eric! The flashes stopped. My head began to ease, the pressure loosening like a valve finally releasing. Eric! My mother's voice was beside me. I turned toward it, but I wasn't really seeing her. I was seeing her, but older. Silver hair. Age lines she didn't yet have. That's it. He's going to the hospital, she said firmly. Bruce started to protest, but she silenced him with a single look, the kind that could stop a charging bull. He sighed and left to get his coat. Enjoy another story. The Jepson Memorial Clinic in the sprawl was hardly a building by any standard, let alone a medical clinic, as far as any real doctor would be concerned. Like most structures in the sprawl, it derived most of its integrity from leaning against. The other shack-like piles of scrap it was sandwiched between, pressed tight in the narrow choke of the district. It was the best one could hope for when seeking high-end medical treatment in the sprawl, and that wasn't saying much. Anna plowed through the doors of the clinic with her best friend Kylie, barely giving the rickety glass time to part for them. Inside the clinic, they were immediately swallowed by the chaos of the waiting room shouting patients, overworked receptionists, and doctors and nurses darting in and out of the space between injured bystanders and whining children, all wrapped in an envelope of filthy floors and near-crumbling walls. Kylie led Anna to the receptionist's desk, shoving past several patients demanding attention and slamming her fist down in front of the clerk. My friend is in labor. We need a doctor now. The receptionist looked up and quickly surveyed the two, spotting Anna's haggard breaths and sweating brow, her dark face tinted a low purple from the flush of blood surging through her system. Oh, Lord, okay, the receptionist said, standing up. Taylor, take these two to room C2 and get a midwife. Anna scrunched her face between breaths before speaking up, her normally mousy voice overcome by a burst of raw desperation. I need a doctor. I'm having twins, please. Don't worry, ma'am. The midwives here are better equipped for birth than any of the doctors. Please, Ma'am, the doctors are already swamped with patients, as you can see. Please trust me, the midwives will take care of you. The receptionist sat back down and shooed them aside as a pair of nurses rolled a wheelchair over and helped Anna into it. They ushered her quickly through a slowly parting crowd, Kylie close behind, as they entered a maze of filthy hallways littered with discarded medical waste and loose wires dangling from shattered ceiling tiles. Anna's breath was becoming harder. To keep in rhythm, she could feel her twins drawing ever closer to their debut into the world. What would their experience in Vargos look like? She and Kylie had grown up together in one of the thousands of pauper houses orphans called home in Vargos, barely surviving even after landing, paying jobs downtown, serving food at synth cafes that catered to corpos who would never know the pain of serving meals they could never afford to eat themselves. She was afraid for her children. How would they escape things like hunger, the fear of walking down crowded streets filled with armed gangsters, or winding up on the wrong side of a fountainhead goon, the kind with enough cybernetics to punch a hole in someone's chest with barely a swing of their metallic arm? These were the only things Anna had ever known, and, for that matter, the only things her husband Will had ever known. Will. Where was he? Kylie! Anna shouted back to her friend, who was barely keeping pace with the brisk march of the nurses pushing her chair. Kylie! Where's Will? He's still at work in Iron Reach, Kylie called, breathless. He said he's going to try and get off in the next 2 hours. Anna groaned and leaned back in the chair, her eyes stung by the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. Her babies wouldn't see their father when they entered the world. Oh, Will. He had been so excited to meet his children. Why was Vargos the kind of city where people met and fell in love only to miss their crowning moments in life because of work? Casey! Over here! She's in labor. She's close. An older woman stepped into view. One of her eyes had been replaced by a crude cybernetic, and her hand was fashioned from the cold metal of obsolete parts. She brought the wheelchair to a sudden stop, nearly sending Anna toppling forward onto the hard tile. Her demeanor was cold, but her touch was surprisingly gentle even as her metallic hand gripped Anna's face. "What's your name, miss?" the woman asked, her voice a distorted rasp, the result of a shredded voice box, likely damaged before the tech for proper replacements had ever been available. Anna grimaced, but met the woman's cybernetic eye, gripping Kylie's hand tightly as her friend finally caught up. "Anna!" "It's nice to meet you, Anna. My name is Casey. You'll be my 5th delivery today. Nurses, wheel her into C2 and get her ready." The nurses did as they were told, moving Anna into the room before, roughly lifting her up in one fluid motion and dropping her hard onto an old stretcher, its crude foot bars already in place. She couldn't help but fixate on what Casey had said, her 5th delivery today. How many of those children had survived? A dark thought, but one she had to push away. The women placed her feet into the stirrups as midwife Casey entered and looked, below Anna's waist. "All right, looking good, Anna. You're just about ready," Casey said, then glanced up at Kylie. "What's your name?" "Kylie, ma'am." "Kylie. Are you the other parent?" "No, her husband's still in Iron Reach. He works at one of the Fountainhead campuses, but he's trying to get off and make it here." Casey sighed and nodded. "My wife works there too. I wouldn't hold your breath for him to get here anytime soon, knowing those factories." "In that case, Kylie, you're going to need to support your friend here. She's going to have to bring these two into the world right now." Casey snapped her fingers. One of the nurses handed her a rubber hose, which she quickly passed to Kylie. Then she moved Anna's hand to grip her friend's. "Have her bite down on that and squeeze your hand. We don't have enough Draxon anesthetic here, so that's the best I can offer. I'm sorry." Anna's eyes widened. She was already struggling, but before she could fully register the dread rising inside her, the rubber hose was between her teeth. She bit down so hard she thought they might shatter. "First push." Anna shrieked, unleashing a chorus of pained cries as she crushed Kylie's hand. "Second push." She felt every pulse of pain, every inch of effort as her twins moved toward the opening, toward the harsh, yet somehow dim, light of the room. Casey cheered her on. Another push, then another, and another. Her breath came in rapid, ragged gasps. The pain was unbearable, each push feeling like the next step toward the end of her story. No more pain, no more hope, as little as there ever was. No more screams in the everyday life of the sprawl. Fearing she might pass out, Anna groaned and twisted her head against the tissue paper affixed to the stretcher. It was wet, but whether from the sweat of a previous patient or her own, Anna couldn't tell. She pushed again, biting down into the rubber hose, and let out another groan. She felt the weight of the city, the lives within her, the crowded clinic, and the yells and energy of the women in the room rising in a chaotic crescendo. And then, Genesis. She heard the sound of one of her babies entering the world, followed quickly by the other. Almost in unison, they let out wild cries. Cries of pain and surprise, greeted by a harsh, dirty room filled with aging equipment, loose wires, and the hands, metal and flesh, of the midwife Casey who passed them to the nurses for cleaning, prepping, and swaddling. Anna smiled weakly, her grip still tight, as the hose drifted from her mouth and onto her chest. It had all happened so quickly, though it felt like years had passed since she went into labor that morning. "Congratulations, Anna. Your twins are healthy and ready to meet their mother," Casey said, smiling. Kylie shrieked with joy and kissed, her friend on the sweaty cheek. But Anna could hardly hear any of it. Despite the noise of the beeping machines, the chattering nurses, Kylie's excitement, and the baby's crying, Anna felt as if she'd gone deaf. She stared bewildered at her children as the nurses brought them over and placed them gently on her bare chest. Sound returned as the babies looked up at her, each with their father's green eyes and the unmistakable chocolate olive skin of their mother. But how long would it last? How long could they stay healthy in the filth and wickedness of the sprawl? Kylie rubbed Anna's back. The pain remained, but it was flooded by a brief wave of ecstasy, blinding yet pure. It lasted only a moment. Then came the dread. How would she care for them when she'd barely survived the birth? What kind of world could she give them? Kylie's voice was soft as she gazed at the children and the woman who was now a mother. What will you name them? Aelin, the GMH birthing institution of Vargos, was the pinnacle of medical science, summed up in a single needle-like skyscraper. Its highest floors seemed to pierce the sky, towering above the rest of the polluted world that made up the city of Vargos, heaven suspended above the mortal coil. Inside the birthing suite, Aelin and her husband Asher were wrapped in the calm embrace of their birthing suite. Soft music melded seamlessly with the all-white interior. Gently running water fixtures added ambiance, complemented by a wide-open window that overlooked the tops of the tallest buildings in Chimera Heights and the rest of Vargos beyond. Not a speck of dirt or dust could find sanctuary in the hyper-sanitized suite. It was the spa most women dreamed of giving birth in, though few ever would. Aelin sat back and glanced at Asher, who was calmly reading a magazine. Every so often, he looked up with a disinterested smile before shifting his gaze to the apparatus affixed to Aelin's waist, a sleek, tubed device designed to carry the baby directly to a processing tank for analysis the moment it entered the world. She felt her stomach. The baby shifted inside her, and she instinctively braced for pain, but only detected a mild pinch now and again. The synth drugs they'd administered the night before. She'd selected Xenoxa from the birthing package months ago, a drug GMH marketed as the mother's mindful choice. She felt certain their marketing team was right for labeling it as such with how little she could feel as the moment drew closer. Aelin looked over at the nurses and doctors. They monitored the machines quietly, nodding every so often with detached interest as monitors beeped steadily and the moment of her son's arrival drew near. She was going to name him Mehmet, after her father. Asher had wanted Deepak after his own, but Aelin had gotten her way this time. He'd already picked the house and the car. At the very least, she'd picked the name. The doctor wandered over, flanked by two nurses whose eyes shimmered faintly with blue light, indicating they were browsing BRZY social media through their neural networks. He placed a hand gently on Aelin's shoulder. Miss... He paused, looking confused. Had he forgotten her name? Gupta. Aelin Gupta, she shot back, annoyed, glancing at Asher for a shared look of indignation. He hadn't even heard her. His nose was still buried in the latest issue of Gaze, skimming through corpo gossip and speculation. Figures. He was a violet drone through and through. At least he made sure they never went cold, hungry, or without luxury. Right. Aelin Gupta. My apologies. The doctor cleared his throat. Are you ready to begin? As I explained yesterday, you'll only need to push a few times and your child will enter the birthing tube and flow into the tank at the far end of the room. From there, your baby will be analyzed and any quick changes you'd like to make color, skin tone, hair color, whatever cosmetic or minor genetic edits can be selected using this tablet here. He handed her a digitablet, its ivory user interface glowing softly. A clean set of drop-down menus awaited her touch, offering an array of final adjustments for her newborn. Yes, let's begin. Are you ready, Asher? She asked, turning to her husband. He looked over with a passing smile. Absolutely. Let's get to it. Very exciting. He mused, then returned to his magazine. Aelin sighed and leaned her head back into the contoured seat of the birthing bed, closing her eyes. I'm ready. All right. Nurse, administer the inducement and set the administrator to deliver 18 milligrams of Xenoxa if we detect any pain signals. Let's make sure Mother here doesn't feel more than a pinch. The nurse nodded as the doctor stepped back and passively clicked a button on the delivery apparatus. Aylin felt a light vibration. Near her waist, followed by a dull pinch, she pushed gently, inviting another small pinch, then another. The effort was minimal. The machines continued to beep softly, the ambient music playing on. She had selected classical music, wanting her son to enter the world greeted by the most beautiful things. She'd also chosen plants and flowers to be arranged throughout the birthing suite. She wondered how many had grown naturally versus those that had been cultivated in a lab. Not that it mattered. Try as she might, she was never able to tell the difference. Another push, another pinch. The machines continued to whir as Aylin felt a small shift. A deep pain flickered inside her, faint at first, near undetectable, followed by a wave of something else. Something new. She felt, just barely, her child beginning to enter the world, and in that moment, Aylin wished her body would let her feel more. She didn't want the pain, not exactly, but she felt like a spectator, watching her own birth story unfold from the sidelines. She wanted to feel her baby take his first breath, to feel the warmth of the perfectly temperature-regulated room on his skin, to see his eyes open and meet hers. Another push, another pinch. She knew it was the last one. The pinch faded, replaced by a rush of relief, then ecstasy, and then Genesis. The Xenoxa flooded her system, muting everything as she watched her son slip into the tube head first, drifting slowly through a river of warm water into the processing tank at the far end of the room. The machines began to hum and beep, data rapidly filling the monitors. The doctor and nurses watched the readouts with focused interest, but none of them had even looked at the child. Then, a soft ding sounded off, like an oven timer. The staff turned to her, all smiles. "Congratulations. Your son is a healthy weight, and we have detected no issues with his health. Feel free to browse the options outlined in the tablet." The doctor turned back to his machines as Asher glanced over at the tank holding their son and nodded with a satisfied smile. Then he looked at Aylin, offering a surprisingly warm expression before returning his attention to the magazine resting on his lap. "Let's pick dark hair, Aylin, and make sure to heighten his language acquisition capabilities. I don't want him to struggle when he enters the workforce. The best executives are polyglots these days. Nothing says hard work like demonstrating your language knowledge without a translator chip." Suddenly, Asher was more engaged than he had been the entire time they'd been at the suite. Aylin nodded and looked down at the tablet. There were so many drop-down menus, she hardly knew where to begin. But then she looked up at the tank. Her baby was suspended in a blue liquid, so peaceful she could barely believe it. His chest rose and fell in gentle rhythm, his head floating just above the surface, eyes still closed. No cries, no moans, no pain. He had entered the world on a warm creek of luxury. Aylin could hardly stand it. She needed to hold him, to feel his skin and breathe in his smell. Her baby. The love of her life. Her joy. Her son. She selected the complete option on the tablet without selecting any changes. Her son was perfect. She was about to set it down to initiate the drainage process to finally hold him when a final message appeared on the screen. A list of 50 names appeared in bold type, each carefully curated. At the bottom of the list, a blank line followed by the name Gupta. A prompt blinked across the display, sterile and unyielding. Please select from the following list of approved names. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.